Call the meeting to order and ask you to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good morning and welcome to the February 22nd County Commission meeting. I would remind you to silence your cell phones, and the meeting documents are on the end of the counter, and if you need a listening device, Carol can help you with that. No, I do not. I apologize. I'm struggling to sign in this morning on my computer. So item number one is a motion to approve the amended agenda.
I'd make a motion to amend the agenda to remove item 4A, the auditor's financial report.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion passed unanimously. Item number two is a motion to approve the amended agenda.
So moved. Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Item number three is a consent agenda. I would ask for a motion.
So moved. Benninger. Second.
I have a motion and a second on consent agenda. A roll call vote.
Benega.
Aye.
Barth.
Aye.
Karski.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
Heiberger.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Next, we have opportunity for public comment. If there's anyone who would like to speak on something that is not on the agenda today, this is your opportunity. We do have a clock that gives you a limited amount of time. You're welcome to come on up, and you will get 5 minutes. The commission does not routinely comment on what you are commenting on just because it's not on our regular agenda.
Okay. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about the two CO2 pipelines that are going through Minnehaha County. One on the east side of Sioux Falls, one on the west side of Sioux Falls. And they want to use eminent domain, and I'm sure it's been hitting into the news a lot right now, the pipelines, for the condemnation of the land for the pipeline investors. The investors will get large tax credits from the pipeline on the one that is on the east side are going, and the one that's on the west side, they claim that they will be returning it to the ethanol plant so they can give it to the creditors. I thought the purpose of eminent domain was to use for schools, hospitals, Interstate I-90, not for the purpose of private business to buy land for the purpose of making large amounts of money. I'm asking you, the commissioners, to consider making a motion that these companies are not being that these companies will not be able to use eminent domain to purchase land for the CO2 pipeline. I'm also asking you as the commissioners if you would consider to contact the state legislature and request the same. I did hear or read that there's a county in the northern part of South Dakota that has stopped or allowed the construction or the surveying of the for the pipeline. I do own land south of Valley Springs. So it's possible that that pipeline on the east side of Sioux Falls will be going through our property. I also do have a piece of land that's very close to the Iron Post, and they are going to go through that piece of property with that. It's the navigation pipeline. If you look at the Argus Leader on Tuesday, February 15th, there is an article there on the front page that particular one here. Yesterday I was looking at the internet. By the way, I look at the internet a lot on pipelines. There's a website for the Des Moines Register. It's WQAD. They have an article there on the pipeline. It's also in the green pages about the pipelines now that are just coming out. The companies want to go through the farms. And will this increase or decrease the value of your land? If you have housing eligibilities, people are going to want to build on that land if you've got a CO2 pipeline right out by your front door. And yet these companies are still going to be getting their tax credits, and this isn't for the small people. This is for the big people. That's where the tax credits work, because tax credits are better than rebates and stuff. So again, I thank you for my time, or your time, and I hope I included it in 5 minutes.
You did great. You're at 1 minute 45 seconds.
Okay.
If you didn't sign in our sign-in sheet for,
Sign in, sign
thank
in.
you. That just helps our
Does
recorder.
anyone want to ask me any question about it?
We can't do it publicly because it's public.
Okay,
That's
anyone want to
okay.
have coffee with me after a while?
There you go. Public comment, so thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anybody else that would like to speak at public comment? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to our regular agenda. Item number 10, is authorize the chairman to sign an annexation petition for the Prairie Nature Area. Albert. Good morning, Albert.
Good morning. Thank you for letting me come in this morning. So we've been working on this for a few years. Quick background history for you. We annexed in the Arboretum just to the east of this area in 2019. We looked at the Prairie Nature Area at that time as well, but because of some of the issues going on there with some easements, some development side of things, we decided to let that be until that kind of got settled out. 3 years later, we're settled out, and so the county has acquired 3 additional properties. With that kind of settling of things, the city has also acquired an additional property, so we would like the county and city to petition together to annex in the rest of the park. The Arboretum has requested that this continue on as well. And so at that side of things, plus the city thinks it's the right time and opportunity for to get this done, we're just requesting that you sign that petition so we can start that process and then take it through that public hearing process. With that in mind, I'll take any questions you might have.
Okay, any questions for Albert this morning? Commissioner Karski.
Can we bring up the map? Is that possible? It's one of the, yep, right there. So when you look at that map, it doesn't look like we're annexing in the roads.
We'll bring the roads in. A map was drawn for a parks purpose, so I didn't remake a new one, but we'll bring in all the right-of-way adjacent as well, yes.
Because otherwise the townships get to take care of the roads in the middle of city. Okay.
Yes, yeah, we won't make them do that.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Good question. Any other questions?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Barr.
are there any residences in this property?
There's one adjacent, but not included in the request for the land that we want to annex.
There was an issue, wasn't there, where it was requested to allow a house to be built kind of on the edge of this?
So in 2019, there was a request to add a second house with access through the Prairie Nature Area. That issue has since gone away. The county now owns, the city owns the land that house was going to be built on. The county owns some of the other land around that area. So there's only one house like there has been for quite a while, and that house is not included because that's privately owned, and we are not reaching out to them at this time to include that.
Madam Chair, and so we do have the emergency access, though, for secondary into that residential development to the north and west.
Correct. That emergency access has been installed, put in place in easement and physical form there just to the west of that existing residential house that won't be annexed with this.
Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, I'd look for a motion.
I move for approval, Benega.
Second, Bender.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Item number 11 is the 2021 Minnehaha County Emergency Management Service update from Dr. Luther, the Ambulance Quality Assurance Director, and Jason Greerman and Dr. Luther.
Good morning, Commissioners. Dr. Jeff Luther, the Quality Assurance individual for the county EMS system and all of its primary service areas and ground ambulances. Thanks for having me. I wish the first thing I could say is I'm here to remove the phrase new normal from the English language, but I don't think I'm going to be able to do that. But what I got today for you is a summary of the 2021 EMS report that has several details in it. And then I will go through the fourth quarter, which I got that on the last. So thank you for, again, having me. There's just been an incredible amount of information and change from standard and typical ways that we do quality assurance. There's been several new layers added to how we conduct that business. But first, I've got the kind of the executive summary. I'll go through this. I think some of the highlights to note that, across the country, some of the biggest concerns have been, still continue to be staffing. And that's with all manners of healthcare. We're talking respiratory therapy students to surgeons. And with that has been an incredible amount of stress involved in the whole system that impacts all of us, not just the providers, but the patients, their families, governments. I don't know really how it's going to end up. But so staffing and turnover is something that has impacted us here. We felt that impact. The staffing, you know, if we look at how we do quality assurance, I look at how care is provided out in the field. But also there's an ordinance that we have to adhere to as well that includes response times and who's on the truck and those sorts of things. And, you know, volunteerism is down across the country, and that continues to impact these small services. Services are just drying up and going away. You know, EMS has yet really to be recognized as an essential service across the country, but that's something on the radar screen that maybe we can enjoy and realize at some point in time. Reimbursement remains a big issue for everyone, but these small communities, they're barely staying afloat. The effects of COVID-19, if we look at the numbers, you know, they started to increase in about 2021, and the impact of COVID-19 has been really significant with respect to those, well, actually everybody, that they have a sick employee that really hamstrings the entire organization and causes problems. The good news in the county, and I'm very impressed by this, is that they've hung in there. These primary service areas have hung in there. Jason and I have had at least one, if not two, governance meetings and have talked to these folks, and they're still there. They're still answering the call. I don't want to jinx anyone by saying that, but you know, they also have to contend with harvest and calving and all those sorts of things. But if we look at the numbers and the response times, I'll go through that, and that'll kind of make some sense. The overall call volume in the county was relatively flat from 20 to 21. Humboldt and MedStar saw just a little bit of a decrease in their overall volume. But interestingly, the calls in the city of Sioux Falls were up significantly. I mean, if we compare and contrast, the city has had record numbers of dispatches on several occasions. They'd have a record day, and then a week or two later, there'd be another record broke in terms of number of calls for service. But with the county, that's remained relatively flat for 20 and 21, and we're hoping that 2022 shows us even more improvement and better numbers, and not so much related to COVID-19. I do sit in on an EMS COVID-19 branch call, and when this first peaked, we would meet daily on a Zoom or WebEx. That included representatives from the hospitals, EMS, all in players and providers, 911 dispatch, police, ambulance. And we started it daily, and we were able to go to 3 times a week, and then we went to once weekly, and then we went back to 3 times a week with that second surge, then went back to once a week, and now we're every other week. So if that's any kind of a trajectory, that's good. I'm going to thank right now Justin Faber for helping me with these graphics. I basically asked him, here's the metrics that I'm trying to get. Can you help me get this in some sort of understandable graph? And he's not here today, but the dude's incredible. He helps me out with just about anything I can. You know, I give him the ingredients and he bakes the cake. So if we look at briefly, it kind of talks to itself, and I'll explain a little bit more in more narrative the explanation of the graphs. But this is a 2021 summary, and I'm going to talk a little bit about sick person. But if we look, and you can enjoy the review of this slide itself, again, kind of speaks for itself in terms of numbers with each service area. And then I've got a legend off to the right there that indicates the breakdown by category. This includes trauma, medical calls, transfers. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then standbys. this is usual business for EMS, but the transfers is really been an incredible increase because to and from nursing homes, out of the hospitals. The hospitals, they tend to these sick folks, and once they get them to a stable enough clinical condition, they want to move those. And so the ambulances are really the only resource to do the transfers to wherever destination they may end up, whether it be an assisted living center, back home, or to another facility. Okay, so if there's not, is there any questions on that? This is the 21 summary. I'm gonna have another slide like this for the fourth quarter. Certainly we can jump back if anyone has any questions. And then I'll jump into the fourth quarter. This is the 3 months, and one of the reasons I was I was very interested in this fourth quarter because we had our second spike of COVID, and I wasn't sure exactly how that would impact the numbers. But anyways, we had 514 calls. I use Image Trend. That's the state reporting software. So I log on to that, and then I can basically pick what I want for performance indicators. And so those that, per the ordinance, that I have reviewed, I've got those listed here off to the right. And we can see in the county we had 6 cardiac arrest calls. Major trauma was 22. Our pediatric calls were at 34. And then a random review of 84. And then I look for certain ones in particular, such as our advanced airway, those patients that are receiving some sort of intervention at that ALS level. And again, the format that I used, I think I've presented it in the past. It works well. It gives us really a good temperature of the quality that's out there. Now, with quality and the environment the way it is, I put mittens on instead of surgical gloves because the system's already so stressed. Not that I give anybody mulligans, but I want to make sure that, I can't just jump down on them if they've missed a small thing that usually they should know better. But that didn't happen. And in fact, I found myself pushing more praise than I have. And if you look at this, I go, geez, wow, the one call, even the high sheriff showed up and was assisted. And so it was collaborative and not calamity. So I was able to give, I made a couple of calls out to some of the services and said, hey, that's a great job that you guys did. In the fourth quarter, again, there were 514 EMS calls, and there was 547 in the third, which I thought, well, why is that? Because we were really kind of seeing more COVID types of calls with that second wave or third, whichever one it might have been, but actually went down in the county. So that was good news. And about 56% of the calls in EMS were medical, and they were not trauma. And trauma calls did increase that last quarter, but they returned to more normal, about 21% of the calls. Again, trauma seems to be seasonally related. And it's, with our sawtooth weather, you hear a motorcycle in your background, and then the next day you see a snowplow truck going by. So, I mean, where are we at in this weather, which impacts EMS? The call types, I'll get into that a little bit more as well. Lots of substance abuse, lots of alcohol. And I get a narrative from the city every day of a dump of about 50 to 70 calls. I kind of just compare again and contrast to what I see in the county. The county isn't as bad, but I swear the call narrative types were, it was either alcohol related or respiratory. Alcohol related, then respiratory. Alcohol related, then respiratory. And it's like, I don't know what society is going to come to. Another impact that we saw was our pediatric call volume. There was a big increase in that, and there is a syndrome, respiratory syncytial virus syndrome, RSV. You may have heard it. Maybe you have kids, grandkids that get that. We were seeing it in June and July. What the heck is going on? You never see it. That's a fall respiratory illness, and we saw this peak. And so when we get the numbers from the state, the epidemiologic numbers, we would, for COVID and active COVID cases, COVID hospitalizations, COVID deaths, et cetera, there was this big blip in RSV with the kids. Why is that important? Well, it kind of looks like COVID when they come in with their symptoms, but they test them and it ends up not being COVID, but it ends up being RSV. We should be seeing a lot of RSV now, which we're starting to see that along with influenza. How's that impact EMS? Well, mothers, grandmothers, fathers, everybody that thinks that an emergency, which we might not think is an emergency when it's their child. So some of these are being transported to the hospital. The most frequent presenting symptoms in the fourth quarter, I got those listed as weakness, chest pain, again, difficulty breathing, pain, altered mental status, fainting, and our common procedures that I look at is IV. I don't trend IV success rates in individual medics, but if it looks like a certain system is not getting their IVs, then I'll dig a little bit deeper. So I'm able to mine that out as well. But they do 12 lead kgs. They check glucose monitoring, airway management, wound care, CPR. And then I got a list, of some of the common medications. And I stood here not too long ago and we started to talk about Narcan. It's the opioid antidote. And it was like, look at this. We're seeing this, and it's onesies and twosies, and it does make a difference where it's at. It's very common now. I mean, Narcan is something that we see a lot. So that's out there. We're using that, and it's making an impact, not really on the epidemic, but on reversing those effects and saving lives in the field. If I compared the fourth quarter 21 to the third quarter, the code stayed about the same. But one thing I mentioned earlier that I wanted to talk about was transfers. Jumped to over 100 in the fourth quarter. That's the first time for the county. And the growth in transfers really that's not unexpected, but, and it lines up with the growth that we're seeing even in the city. These hospitals have to decompress, and they've got to move these patients, so one of the resources they use are ambulances. Again, continuing, with this impact of COVID-19, I don't want this to be a COVID-19 report, but it seems like that's all that there is to have in there. For a while, what happened to our cardiac arrest? Where were the heart attack victims? Where were they? Were they staying at home? We've seen those numbers go down, and then they're starting to come back. But this COVID-19 has really impacted in a strange way and trying to make sense of it. And if we look at when the vaccination came out, and then the booster, and then the variants, it leaves you kind of scratching your head. And as an alleged expert, if a layperson, who's my wife, she is the layperson. She's actually the only layperson that knows more than anything, so I'll just say, well, what do you think? And then she'll give me the information. But anyways, if we look at total volumes of respiratory calls, I kind of hit on that really spiked. And then I got some other percentages in there that I will leave at your discretion unless there's a question that needs to have more detailing. Dispatching information, I've got that last on my narrative here, the executive summary. Again, the top 5 incident types remained kind of the same as the last quarter. And then now response times. This is good. Despite all of this, despite moving into winter, where we do see a longer spike in our response times, things have stayed pretty well. And they continue to be pretty stable across the county, not much in the way of fluctuations. And that's a good sign for the system overall. And then I also have to throw in the sheriff's deputy, which their medics and their response contributes substantially to our EMS first response in the county. So that's a big deal. The rubber's already on the road, and we're able to get AEDs on scene faster, get the scene cleared, make that scene safe, and within a minimal amount of time. I provided that metrics too. Now, I pretty much talked a little bit about all of that in this narrative. Here again is some pie graphs that kind of go through the different things. And the first slide that I have, yes, is a response breakdown by categories. And again, you can see the colors of the call types that we respond to. And, you know, medical, we would see in the summer 50-50 medical versus trauma. And again, that's people are out and are more active, and there's more of a problem with trauma than there is medical calls. But as you can kind of see this, and then the transfers is a big part again, and that's something that's new that we're seeing, and I don't think we're out of that yet. But transfers are, you know, that's not a real typical thing that we look at in EMS. But again, that's the resource that's available, and that's the resources that we use to move these patients out of the hospital, from nursing homes to the hospital, to other step-down units, to home. Some of the hospitals may have to have a transfer to another person. So it's not just local. Somebody may be from Ipswich, and we can't use that ambulance, and they have to be transferred from Del Rapids Hospital out, and if they don't have the Ipswich ambulance, and then these local ambulances are called upon to make those transfers. But the majority of what they do, it's not that we're losing business for that. It's just the transfer and the nature of that beast itself that we're using as a resource to move these patients around. That should improve. This is kind of a busy slide, but there's way more detail in it that shows you exactly the number and types of calls. And again, you go from transfers all the way down to diabetic problems that we were able to pull. These are the ones, there are more than that I may not have gotten because the records and the patient care report may not have been uploaded yet, but that gives us, I think, a good stream of what we're seeing. And again, if we look at response breakdown, again, by category, that's what I had in that first slide for all county. This is for this fourth quarter. Again, it's very similar or parallel, if you will, in terms of the majority is transfers. And then the next non-transport is a sick call, sick person rather. And we don't know what that is. And it'll come in, and the dispatcher the call taker will take that from the requesting party, and it's just basically cataloged and dispatched as a sick person. It could be anything, fever, nausea, whatever. And then out of that, then we discern a working diagnosis or an impression, if we can, whether that's a cardiac or if it's a respiratory or if it's a gastrointestinal issue, and then that information then is put into the chart as that medic's working diagnoses. Next one I have here, I think can I get that one back? And sorry about that. That is our response times. And then again, what I've typically have reported out on those are dispatch to en route. We look at the time that it gets to on scene, and then we look at response times, total response times, that's the two, and then how long are these services out of service? How long is the call? And you can kind of see where the average is and where the 90th percentile is. Okay, now the next one, and that's my last slide, and I added into this one was the Minnehaha County Sheriff's Office, our road deputies, our medic deputies, and you can see where they are in comparison. It would be nice to have a lot more of that, but again, they're not transporting, right? Now, as a sidebar commentary, we are looking at a thing that's very interesting. It's not applicable yet, or is it really that pertinent for the county? But there's a big initiative across the country looking at, it's an RLS, red lights and siren. And they're looking at changing response types and responding out of the chute to different calls. Currently, we have priority systems. Priority 1 is everybody with red lights and siren. Priority 2 is red lights, and then they add fire. P3 is a lower volume or lower risk acuity issue. But there is wonderful information out there, very compelling, that not being dispatched, red lights and siren, impacts public safety for one. If you look at an ambulance that's involved in a crash, and some of these investigators, they're looking at these numbers very hard. One ambulance, if it crashes and it has just occupants in it that are the attendees, not even a patient, it takes sometimes 2 ambulances, and other resources are diverted to clean that up. It's still new. This area has been chosen to participate in that. Not that we're doing it, we're just right now kind of looking at all the information, and we're trying to get our IQ on this to see what, if that makes a difference. But they equate this to running to the wall. You know, if you transport the patient, lights and sirens, to the hospital, you know, the difference with red lights and not is an average of about 42 seconds. Well, I asked my layperson, she says, well, hold your breath for 42 seconds. I said, well, that's a good point. But what do they do once they get to the hospital? You know, you stand on the wall and you got to wait for whatever the hospital does to take care of the patient. But I'll keep you posted on that, more to come. Very difficult, I think, to implement that in the county because of our distances to travel, but it's still, speed is a factor in safety. So with that, I think that's about all I got. I'll open it up for any questions at all, and I'll do the best I can to address those.
Thank you, Dr. Luther. Are there questions for Dr. Luther?
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Barth?
Sorry to delay us, but so with one ambulance, it looks like their response time is, well, their 90th percentile is much higher than others. Are they doing okay? Do they just have greater distance to go?
Yes, and that's not an anomaly. Now, what I want to do is compare that to what the ordinance says, and it's difficult, I think, in this day and age to, and I don't want to speak prematurely because I got some information this morning that I need to look at, but no, they're fine. I think that we are fine, and our governance meetings are important for that because it's like, you know, what are your variables out there that could impact you? One, is there going to be people showing up? And one day, everybody's fully staffed, and the next day they have 2, 3 out. And remember, when these folks are taking care of those that have positive COVID and following CDC guidelines, if there's a close contact, despite all of the protective gear that they wear, if it's a close contact, then they should be scrubbed out and isolated. That's going to impact some of these response times because they may have to make another call for the backup to make the en route to the station to do that. I will, though, I remain impressed with just how well we've maintained. I thought I would have not as good of numbers as I was able to present today.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Okay. Very thankful we have emergency services available. Very thankful for our volunteers that are going out there and exposing themselves on a regular basis and then having to go home and deal with their own families. So very thankful for volunteers in the Midwest. So thank you, Dr. Luther, for your time.
Thank you.
Move on to item number 12 is a special personnel action to approve position changes in Facilities Department. Good morning, Carrie.
Good morning, Carrie Deaver from Human Resources. What we're asking your approval today is to make 2 position changes for facilities. We have a vacancy at the building maintenance tech level from a recent promotion that Mark Krenz would like to reclassify into a senior level to help with HVAC. At the same time, we have 2 custodial vacancies that we'd like to reclassify into 1 senior building maintenance tech. To do this really doesn't have any budget impact. In fact, there should be enough savings to help supplement our custodial contract as well. And then if you approve those, we'll begin recruitment immediately to fill.
Okay. Any questions for Carrie?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Item number 13 is consider a motion to approve the extension of the COVID-related benefits.
You'll recall, of course, that we had quite a spike in cases in January for our COVID-related employee situations. The commission approved 2 items in January that really have helped us respond. One was COVID sick leave for our employees, and another was offering double pay for people in 24/7 operations in the sheriff's office and JDC to help cover for the staff shortages we were experiencing. Thankfully, our COVID cases have declined quite a bit, but unfortunately, they're still there. So we're asking for these 2 benefits to be extended through April 29th to allow us to continue to respond. Both have been very helpful.
Questions on the COVID-related response? Motion?
Make a motion to approve?
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Item number 14 is consider a motion to authorize the annual emergency management interfund transfer. Susan, good morning.
Good morning, Susan Beeman, Auditor's Office. I'm here to request a motion to transfer $270,554 from the general fund to our emergency management fund, which represents our transfer that was needed for last year, 2021. It was missed in our year-end processes, and the transfer is still needed. It is a budgeted item that we put on the budget, but it still needs your approval. Just to remind you, our emergency management fund is funded partially with federal grant funds, but the remainder comes from the general fund.
Any questions? Motion?
Make a motion to approve.
I have a motion and a second, Commissioner Barth. Roll call vote.
Benega.
Aye.
Barth.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
Karski.
Aye.
Heiberger.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thanks, Susan. Item number 15, to authorize the chairman to sign the joint powers agreement between Minnehaha County and the city of Delaware Rapids regarding Highway 129, which is 474th Avenue. Steve, good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Commissioners. Steve Groen, Highway Superintendent. You're going to see a series of these joint power agreements coming in over the next several months. We had a lot of agreements with other agencies that were just handshake agreements that we are in the process of memorializing. This is County Highway 129 heading north out of Del Rapids, and the Del Rapids City Council passed this back on February 7th. This would just, we'll be maintaining this road and owning it like our other roads outside of townships.
Great. Any questions for Steve on that? Look for a motion.
Make a motion to approve?
Second.
Motion and a second. Roll call vote.
Bender.
Aye.
Karski.
Aye.
Barth.
Aye.
Benega.
Aye.
Heiberger.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Item number 16 is authorize the chairman to sign an amendment to the professional engineering services agreement between Minnehaha County and Alteg Engineering Incorporated for Minnehaha County 20-03 Bridge Guardrail Rehabilitation.
I'm going to
And I
have Jacob
apologize
Mars,
if I annihilated that name.
excuse me, I'm going to have Jacob Mars present
Okay,
this item.
great.
Morning, Commissioners. Jacob Mars, Highway Department. So this project, this will be the second amendment we've come back for this project. It's retrofitting existing structures with new guardrail, and it's kind of a messy project. Whenever you take new standards and try to apply to something old, there's just a lot of back and forth between the county and the consultant, and it was a learning process for both parties.
Okay. Questions on this bridge? Motion?
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Jacob. Item number 17 is authorize the Highway Department to purchase 2 front-end loaders through the Minnesota State contract. Steve.
Good morning again, Steve Groen, Highway Superintendent. These 2 front-end loaders are critical pieces of equipment for the Highway Department. They are both in the 2022 budget. We did get a favorable pricing from the Minnesota State contract, so I'm looking for your approval to proceed with purchasing these loaders. Our main loader, Unit 2507, in our last snow event was broke down, so we did have to use a spare loader, and we appreciate your support.
Questions?
Make a motion to approve?
Second with a quick question.
Commissioner Barth?
So we're not just buying it from Minnesota because you have connections there, is it?
No, we can look at the South Dakota bid, the Sourcewell contracts, and the Minnesota bids.
Thank you.
They were the lowest price by far.
I also have a question is how delayed do you expect this equipment to be?
We're expecting delivery this year. I think I had on here The larger model would be later in the year, November, December, and the 544P in September, October. So we would have that one before the next snow season.
So I'm assuming we're going to surplus the other two that we
Yep.
have. Will we hang on to those until after we receive our equipment in case it's delayed?
That's our plan, is to hang on to them until the new ones are in service.
Okay, that would be great. There definitely is a supply chain issue for big equipment, for any equipment. I have a motion and a second to approve. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. One more. Number 18 is authorize the chairman to sign agreement between Minnehaha County and Mccook County for 2 miles of Highway 140, which is 263rd Street.
Good morning again. This is our 2 miles of gravel road that Mccook County has been gracious enough to maintain and plow for us for the last several years. Our agreement was not memorialized, and the highway superintendent in Mccook County is getting ready to retire this summer. This pretty much just formalizes our agreement. We anticipate nothing will change. We'll still supply gravel. We'll do the weed spraying, but it's just, once again, we're memorializing a handshake agreement.
Okay. Any questions on that road?
I'll make a motion with a comment.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Commissioner Bender?
I just want to thank Steve for his leadership in getting these agreements memorialized. I mean, we all know that when there's changes, sometimes memories don't go along with that, and so it's great that we are getting all of these small agreements where we're collaborating with other governmental entities memorialized so everybody knows who's on first and who's on second. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would also ditto that. Just because we're aware of it and know that they're out there doesn't mean that there's actually an agreement to follow it through. So, yes, I've been aware of this road for a long time, and I was like, well, I didn't know there wasn't one. So I have a motion and a second to approve the agreement. All those in favor say, roll call vote.
Bender.
Aye.
Benega.
Aye.
Barth.
Aye.
Karski.
Aye.
Heiberger.
Aye, motion passes unanimously. Thanks, Steve. Item number 19 is the Planning Department's annual presentation. Scott?
Good morning, Scott Anderson, Planning Director, and I today want to just give you a brief overview of what's going on in the Planning Department and Parks Department. And I think a lot of that can just be summarized into the amount of building activity that we've had last year. And I put together some statistics. We issued approximately 500 building permits for the year, which included 66 new homes. And the total valuation of all the building permits that we issued in the county was about $68 million, which is a substantial amount of money. It's about half of what the city of Rapid City issued. And if you think about that, it is quite impressive. And also to put that into perspective, we issued more new single-family residences than the city, all the combined cities of Crooks, Del Rapids, Garretts, and Hartford. So we are issuing more home permits than those municipalities last year. And so that then relates into other issues that we deal with, such as platting. We saw a lot more platting last year of plats, people coming in, and you'll probably hear this from Julie Risty, because the amount of plats that we do also reflects the amount of plats that other entities are doing, like the city of Sioux Falls and the other municipalities, because it basically is an indicator of development that's occurring in our jurisdiction and other jurisdictions. Also in the report, you can see the number of other types of submittals that we work with. And the public may not know what we all do, but we deal with variances. We issue septic permits. Last year, we issued 147 new septic permits, and that sort of reflects those new homes, because each new home basically has a septic permit. But there's also then permits that are issued for new septic tanks, because sometimes old septic tanks fail and a new one needs to be put in. Maybe people will add a bedroom, and which will require their septic system, their drain field to be expanded. That requires a permit, and those are also all inspected by our office. We deal with ag tourism permits. We deal with preliminary plans and subdivision plans, which are an indicator of future development. As I indicated, the plats, last year we did 132 plats, and normally we'll do about 60 or 70 in a year. That's the indicator of how much growth we're seeing or the demand for growth in our county. We do rezonings and conditional use permits as well, and those are the items that basically take up a lot of our staff time presenting to Planning Commission and you as well as they come in. The other thing that you're all very familiar with is that our office does code enforcement, and I sort of highlighted that. It's not a significant number. I mean, it wouldn't appear to be a significant number when you get 45 nuisance complaints or zoning complaints, but as we are all aware, last year, if you recall, sometimes each one of those complaints can be a long, long process because we're dealing with these people on many, many occasions, going out there, working with them, identifying what needs to be removed, calling them, following up. So there is a lot of work that we do with code enforcement. Out of those 45, and the other complaints that we had, 6 of those were brought before you to be declared as public nuisances. And some of those were resolved, some are still ongoing, and we'd like to, move those people along, and they are continually making progress. And some of them we had to do a cleanups on, where we we make arrangements to find someone to go out and clean it up, and that is a challenge because people are busy, and it's hard to find a contractor that will actually do sometimes that work. So we're lucky that we have been able to partner with other businesses in the community that have been willing to help us. Then that sort of concludes, what I want to talk about with the planning department. My office also works with the Parks Department, and for the public, it's important for them to know that basically we have a 6-month operation. It typically opens around April 15th and we close around October 15th. And we operate the Wall Lake Park and the Prairie nature area. We have a joint powers agreement with the City of Sioux Falls on the operation of the Prairie nature area, and you discussed that today, the annexation of that. So the City of Sioux Falls primarily is responsible for maintenance and development of the Prairie nature area, but we are responsible for Wall Lake Park and the Prairie Park. One of the things that I made you aware of last year, towards the end of the year, we completed the installation of a 9-hole disc golf course at Wall Lake. It took us about, because of supply chain issues, it took us about 2 to 3 months to get the baskets. And then we got those after Labor Day and we installed them. And then basically the park was done for the year. So I'm excited to actually have that rolled out this spring, and it'll be interesting to see how much usage it gets and what kind of comments we get back from that. But we do rent the park out, picnic shelters, and we had about 15 of those reservations last year and about 3 major events. And the one thing that I did want to make you aware of is that we have a lease with the Girl Scouts, and they occupy part of and utilize part of Wall Lake. And our 5-year agreement with them expires at the end of this year. So we will be working with the Girl Scouts and more than likely renewing that lease. I would not anticipate that it would not be renewed from their interest. They continue to want to utilize that site. Mm-hmm. So I'll be bringing that to you this year for consideration and how we deal with that. So I'd be glad to answer any questions you have, but that pretty much is the short, sweet version of my presentation for today.
Questions for Scott? Commissioner Karski.
A couple things, Scott. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the Wall Lake Park, that was a donation to the county by Winona Lions, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
We have a Lions Lodge there, a little stone cabin that they built probably in the 20s maybe, and we have that available for rentals, and it gets rented out for parties, birthday parties and whatnot.
Yeah, another great legacy from the Lions family. In the past, you've had a part-time code enforcement individual. I don't remember you having anybody last summer, is that right?
We did have someone.
You did, okay. And the intent is to hire a code enforcement individual for this summer again?
I'm evaluating that.
Okay.
It is somewhat useful, but not as useful as I had anticipated or desired it to be. The position is good at, going out, doing some preliminary investigation and documentation, but because it's sort of seasonal, it's still, the heavy lifting typically falls on a planner to have to, write the letters, deal with the public. If we need to declare it a nuisance, I just don't feel comfortable bringing someone that works, sending them down here to make a presentation to you. So that's why I have had planners primarily working on that. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do this year on that.
Madam Chair? The last thing then, I get the code enforcement deal. Staff out at the park, you said you're having staffing issues, hiring part-time. What are we paying the part-time staff people at the park for the
At the
parks?
parks, $17 an hour, and that's a significant increase from what they were getting last year, and I could not recruit. My staff from last year are not coming back, so that's part of the issue.
Has nothing to do with their boss, right?
I hope not. But, so yeah, and I met with Carrie Deaver last week, and we are advertising that. I came up with a good idea of, it's always about getting the word out, and our best workers for Wall Lake have been retirees that sort of live around the lake. So I reached out to Sheriff Milstead, who lives on the lake, and he's helping me think of people. But then I also reached out to our highway superintendent and had them put a variable message board out at the highway department, out at Wall Lake, saying seasonal park workers needed, and then call my number upstairs, and I think that went out yesterday, and I already had 3 calls.
Oh.
So it worked out really well, and people that live out there say, "Oh yeah, I might be interested. I'm retired. I used to do now. It's sometimes difficult to find people that want to work as much as we need them to work, because it is a 7-day-a-week job, because I have to be responsible and fill those positions 7 days a week. And so it's getting people to work on weekends, getting them to, deal with rowdy people that sometimes don't listen to instructions, about, animals on the beach and beer bottles and whatnot. So, and cleaning bathrooms. No one ever likes to do that. That's of what people don't like to do. So the mowing isn't necessarily the most difficult thing to sell. It's the cleaning the beach, and cleaning the bathrooms, and some minor things like that.
Have you thought about splitting that position in 2, and then they could rotate weekends and
That's what
rotate days?
So what I do is I hire a number of people, and typically I don't have people that want to work 40 hours a week.
Right.
So I have several people, and you're right, that's exactly what I do is, you might work 2 days a week, and you might work 2 days a week, and you might work 2 days a week, and so I get several people that are willing to work a couple days a week, and that's been how I've been filling those positions. It's not one person that works 40 hours a week.
Additional questions? I'm glad you brought up the parks agreement with the Girl Scouts. It's hard to believe it's already been 5 years. And I would encourage you to start a little bit early on that, and not last minute. Only just last year they came up with a partnership, I believe, with, I want to say Boys and Girls, but I don't think that's right. Was it?
The YMCA.
The YMCA. They came up with an agreement with YMCA to use that campgrounds too, between the 2 of them, and it actually ended up being a really good fit for them and for us. So
Yeah, I will be reaching out to the Girl Scouts, but they're also, this is sort of their downtime of the year. They don't really start ramping up stuff until April, May.
Yeah.
So I'll start working with them.
this spring, this summer.
Yeah, spring and
Yep.
summer, and get it on before the end of the year.
Yep, sounds great. Thanks, Scott.
Anything else?
I don't think so.
Thank you very much.
Item number 20 is the Equalizations Annual Presentation. Chris Lilla.
Good morning, Commissioners. Chris Lilly, Equalization.
Pretty brief with the seasoned commission board here, so I didn't go into a lot of detail. The focus I wanted to touch base on this here is that our office is not sitting stagnant. We are working, and we're working very heavily. You know, obviously our goal year to year is to provide quality, fair, and equal assessments. That's our mission. With a continued focus that the taxpayers of Minnehaha County is our #1 priority. We serve them. Our office is really good at that, especially some of my front staff. They're exceptional at customer service and things like that. So I just wanted to reinvigorate to the commissioners and to the public that our office doesn't just do values. We do a huge array of other things. A lot of the things that we manage are plats along with the county zoning as well as the city. Owner occupies, discretionary formulas for the small towns, City of Sioux Falls, elderly frees, disabled veterans, paraplegic vets, energy credits, historical tax moratorium, exempt property applications, new and existing, ag exemptions, all sales, all building permits, as well as processing of all abatements. So some of the things, I just put some of the stats of what we've completed for the 2022 assessment year. 9,017 transfers in Minnehaha County. That is a huge number. Countywide, 7,724 new building permits that we have to muddle our way through and process. 47 new exempt applications. 655 continuing exempt applications. 2,000 plus new or owner occupied. So the reason there's a plus there is if the newspaper will pick this up, we're mailing out assessment notices. Property owners have until March 15th to make application. That's the reason why the notices go out and you have a later deadline. You get your assessment notice, go, I'm not owner occupied. I've got a couple week window there that they can still make applications. So the plus is to indicate we're not done yet. We mailed out a couple weeks ago about 1,600 that we identified as potentially qualifying, but we have not received. Those are filtering in. I mean, that number is changing daily. And also, we still have until March 15th. So 2,000 plus owner-occupied applications. 1,196 new parcels were created this year, and that is due to plats, splits, merges. Not all plats, but somebody wants to split their property into a footage deed or something like that, as well as 148 abatements. The next thing is just some numbers comparing 21 to the 22 assessment year. You know, for 21, we had 7,391 building permits. 588 million of value, 22, 7,724, an increase of 333 building permits for year to date. And you can see the value. We have a 536 million increase in building permit values. Now that's not our value, that's the building permit value. That's what they put on when they sign up. So obviously growth there. 21, our ending countywide value, we were at 19 billion. Our preliminary right now, and again, this is preliminary because it's still in flux. We haven't gone through boards yet. So, but 22 billion, a $2.85 billion increase. I mean, that is. There's a lot of counties in South Dakota that don't have that much value in their county. Period. Or, you know, I mean, it's. Our increase is larger than a lot of taxing entities. So. Transfers, again, I highlighted that before. Last year we had 7,816. This year we closed 9,017 transfers, an increase of 1,201. So the points I want to make is, as well as you're hearing from every other department, we are growing, we are moving, we are getting stretched thinner and thinner and thinner. So this is kind of my prelude to you to what to expect in April for our budget requests. So.
Thanks, Chris. Is there questions for Chris? I would remind the taxpayers that equalization has basically nothing to do with the taxation. He just figures out the value of your house. The taxes are figured out later. And a positive is that as we continue to add that growth, that helps to offset the increases in what the tax levy would be.
Right.
And so those are all really positive things for the taxpayer to hear, is that there is continued to be amazing growth in this county.
It truly is. It truly is. When it comes to the tax burdens, you know, the old saying is many hands makes light work. We've got many more hands contributing to fill the budget requests that are coming, and that helps keep the taxes lower for everyone.
Yep. Great. Growth is good. Commissioner Bender.
So I know despite all of this busyness, you guys also had a move of your office in the last week. Can you just give us an update on how that went?
Yeah, not the best time of year for us. You know, luckily this year we got worked ahead, you know, in anticipation of that move. When we got worked ahead and got our ducks in a row pretty good, so it actually ended up being a pretty good time to move. But we moved last Monday across the street to the Extension Building, 220 West 6th Street. Monday afternoon we officially started, and by Monday afternoon we were about 95% moved in. Tuesday morning was the last little bit, and then it's been unpacking and organizing, but we're functional. I think we've got one computer left that a network connection is not functioning, but otherwise all other workstations are working. We're kind of unpacked there's still some things to put away, but we're 99%. We're ready to serve the public, and we already have been, you know, as people have been coming over there. It is a little, just for the public, the northwest corner is the public entrance. As my office is now on the ground floor and a little noisier than what I'm used to, I see people walk to this door and then walk around that one and then go around and then walk around the building before they find their way in there. We do have signage on all of the doors. This is not an entrance pointing them there, but no one ever reads signs, so.
Commissioner Karski.
Thank you, Chris. Just for the public also, how many staff do you have? How many people are out in the field, boots on the ground, doing appraisals, et cetera?
Full staff, we have 22, 14 appraisers to cover the whole county. And right now we are down on appraisers. We've got a couple that have left. We've got one that her last day was yesterday. We've got another one that is shifting. He's part-time right now. He stayed on. He's going on his own, and I couldn't be prouder of him. And so we are going to be very light on appraisers when this appeal season hits. So I'll kind of touch on that in the next briefing a little bit, but for the public, I'll just jump into it now. Market values have increased. So as those increases come, you need to look at your property values on your assessment and ask yourselves, if you were to sell your house or your property, will it sell for the assessed value or more? And if the answer is yes, please don't call us. We're going to be busy.
Okay, if that's the end of your equalization presentation, we'll go on to item number 21, which is a briefing on the 2022 Equalization Assessment Notice changes.
Yes, so this is the big one. As everyone is aware, our market has increased. Our assessment notices are finalized. They're sitting at qualified pre-sort. I don't have a date of mailing for you yet. I'm waiting to get that word from qualified pre-sort on when they get them all processed, but they should go out this week. I'm hopeful tomorrow or Thursday at the latest. March 1st is the deadline for us to have those postmarked. I like to get them out early to allow our staff the time when there is questions from the public and the taxpayers that we have time to work with them before we get to the appeals. You know, a lot of questions or a lot of issues can be resolved if we have an error and a property owner says, hey, I think my value's out of line, calls us up and we've got 1,100 square foot of basement finish and they said, I don't think I have that much. We can send an appraiser out there to look at it, come back and say, yeah, you're right, we did have an entry error. Somebody keyed in, you removed something. I can't explain all the reasons why, but we can do that correction. So we can come back, process their property under the current model, come up with a value, contact them and say, yeah, this should have been your value. And if you're good with that, it's not an appeal. We'll do that, we'll forward that through as a correction. It's easier for the local board, for the county board, for the taxpayer, for our office. So I like to get them out early for that reason. Some people wait till the end, but they are going out, and as everyone knows, our market has gone crazy. Not only on top of our market, our office has made some great strides in the last couple of years, particularly this year, that also impacts those values. Some of those that we did, I mentioned to the county board last year, we had to put on new cost tables this year. That was not in my radar. The market should have indicated a little bit of that to me last year, is we had to do some greater increases than normal. You know, it used to be 3 to 4% annually, and all of a sudden you start seeing 8%. You know, that was kind of that, you're starting up that curve a little bit. So the cost tables and the factors that we were having to put on, all of a sudden were getting excessive, and so it required new cost tables. So we put on new cost tables for residential and commercial this year. Now, how does that impact a property owner? I can't tell you what changes in those cost tables, we get them. But for an example, if bricks in the cost tables went up 20%. If you have bricks in your home, you went up. If you didn't have bricks, you didn't go up. I don't know all of those things. That's a mass data set that comes in. And that is required by state law. We use Marshall and Swift cost valuation services. That's where we get our tables from. We were getting a little bit outdated and we needed to refresh those. So there is impacts that I have no control over. I don't know how it affects everybody because I don't know all of the changes in a million lines of code of what changes. So there is some of that in there. Small towns, we did equalize small towns and township land methods. We had a lot of disparity and it was kind of the last thing for land, so there is some changes there. We did not really market adjust at that point. We just took our current values and their methods and made them match up. So some people had some shifts up or down to be equal with others. Some came down to be equal with others like them, but we've equalized that. In lieu of a physical review that we want,
Sorry, can you explain what you mean when you say you equalize small
Yeah.
towns?
The land. So and I'll just use a neighborhood. We'll just say Brandon, for instance. I've got a neighborhood. I've got, 700 parcels in there, and they're all different, varying square footages. Some of the lands were valued at front foot method, meaning they might be $400 a front foot. Some of them might have been valued at square foot method in the past at $2 a square foot. Some of them might have been overrides that somebody just plugged in and said, this is the land value. And even within those front foot methods, I might have had a lot that was at $400 a front foot and two parcels away that was at $270 a front foot. There was a big scattering of inconsistent data. And what we did is I pulled them all back in, said, here's your value. We went at a square foot. What are you calculating? What are you calculating? What are you calculating? And we used those averages and pushed them back to everybody. And so we took all of these highs and lows and we narrowed down the field. Now, if you've got a 10,000 square foot lot and I have a 10,000 square foot lot, we're the same value. We may not have been that in the past.
So you equalize Brandon within Brandon, but not Brandon within
No.
They're all-
It's only within that neighborhood, yes. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, but that does have some impact. Some people will shift. The good news is when we do any changes on land typically represents about 2% of your total value. Unless you're a vacant parcel, then it's 100%. But if you've got a house on there, land, I could add $10,000 to your land and it'll probably change your overall assessed value 1%. It's really a small weighted percentage. So, but it's one of those necessary foundations that we have to have equal and accurate. And so we've made great strides there. We wanted to conduct a physical review this year. That would be the first time in many, many years. In light of COVID and concerns about our staff and about the public, us potentially going door to door to door to door and spreading COVID, we opted not to do that. In lieu of that, we did a desktop grade review this year. And again, look through, we set parameters. We've developed a grade guide for all appraiser staff to say if a house is this big, if it has this, this is the grade. And if you're going to go above or below that, you need to be justifying it. And again, we had a huge mix of grades. And so our staff did a wonderful job going through line by line and comparing and setting those. So some people's grades changed this year in relation to years past. Some went up, some went down. But the ultimate goal was to say if we all have a 1,600 square foot house on the same street and we all look the same, we all have the same amenities, we should all be the same grade. We were not in the past. It's just one of those, the cleanup that takes time. So there is some impact there. As I've mentioned in the years past, we've split a lot of our neighborhoods from large ones into smaller ones, and that was a great first step. This year there has been a few neighborhoods that we've adjusted those boundaries. The current boundary we did, now that we analyzed the sales, they're still selling a little bit different over here, so we've either made that neighborhood a little larger or made it a little smaller, and that's an ongoing, just correcting, just adjusting. So not very much of that this year, but there is a few. One of the bigger ones is a commercial building model. I've talked to you a couple years about that it's on the goal and it's to do, and this is the first year it's rolling out. So commercial, there will be some properties that will see an impact, but now, as opposed to, we'll just say Main Street, Sioux Falls, you've got banks, you've got restaurants, you've got apartments, you've got everything all being in the same study group. Now, banks are compared against banks. Apartments are compared against apartments, and the other ones are not having impact on those. as well as equalizing and new cost tables for those. So there is some, I would say the majority of increases or decreases in the commercial, we ended up about plus or minus 5%. But then we've got the outliers that have been historically lower than everyone else like them, or historically higher than everyone else like them. There's going to be some movement, but we've analyzed it to death. We've got sales, we've got income models, we've got, it's probably the most heavily analyzed thing that we've got, and I think we can support all of our values.
Great.
Did you have a question?
Oh, no,
Oh,
sorry.
okay. So now the real meat and potatoes, you know, last year, every year we're adjusting and calibrating to the market. Last year when we concluded the countywide level of assessment, we were at 90.5%. State law says I have to be between 85 and 100. We were at 90.5. As I began this year, as the market goes up, my starting point this year was at 76.5. That is the measure of how much our market has increased in 1 year's time. That analysis indicates that Minnehaha countywide, the average increase in values, not at my values, but the average increase of sales values was 18.3%. That is unheard of. It is absolutely unheard of. The scarier part of that is as I analyze the year's sales, and I've got a neighborhood of 70 sales from November 1st to October 31. And I create my model and I push my change and I revalue those properties and then I compare my new value to the sales to compute new ratios. And I go back and look, I've got 10 sales that I'm over on. I shouldn't be over, I've got pretty tight statistics, but I look at those sales. If they sold in November last year, if they sold in December last year, January, February, those are the ones I'm over on. I've never seen this before, but what that tells me is November 1 to March, the market went like this, and April on, the market went like this. And that is where the volume of sales are. And that's where I have to work off of the average. So we do have some that are going out as over-assessed this year because my year is here and the average is April on. That's where the volume of sales is. So we'll see what we hear from those taxpayers. There isn't much. I mean, we're 104, 105% of their assessments, where all the other ones were at 92% of their sale price. So we'll see what comes out of that. You know, in my world, if you're 104, that's still a pretty dead-on assessment considering things. But just to give the commission some heads up. So 18.3% is what we came up with, and that is based on we had 9,000 transfers. Of those transfers, we had 4,109 of them are the ones, the sales that we can use. So any sale that happens that is a relative, wasn't advertised, those have to be set aside. We can't use those to raise or lower the market. The good sales, the arm's length sales, we had 4,109 of those. So that's where we take our initial look at the countywide. That's where those statistics come from. At that point, I take all of those sales and I start splitting them apart, putting them in the towns, in the neighborhoods, and then I start looking at those. And that's where the real work comes in. And then even in a neighborhood, specifically for residential, I'll take the countywide, I'll go to Brandon City, then I'll go into a neighborhood in Brandon, and I'll look at just the sales in that neighborhood, and then that gets one further deep look where specifically for houses, we look at older, mid-aged, and newer, and we drill and start separating those sales, and then we say, okay, here's our older sales in this neighborhood. I'm at 80%, I need to be in the 90s, I need a 12% increase here. You know, maybe I'm at a 60 on the mid-age, I need a 20% on these folks and these, and I put that all back together. And then I put it back in the neighborhood, and I revalue it, check that neighborhood level, and we do that for each and every neighborhood. Once we're done, we pull them all back to the countywide and recompute. After our analysis and doing all of that, we ended at 90%. So last year we ended at 90.5. I never know the number, and when I pulled it back out and we're at 90, I'm like, okay, we're good. The only next step would be to go back into some of those and increase those a little more yet. But as long as I'm between 85 and 90, and we always want to be pretty close to the same so there isn't an impact in the taxable factor. Some important things to note, 18.3 is the average. Neighborhoods, 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 location, location, location. Not every neighborhood went up 18.3. The next attachment that I gave you is the actual breakdown of every neighborhood that we have in the county. Like the very top one, 235, that's an Arbor's Edge neighborhood here in Sioux Falls. We had 49 arm's length sales within that neighborhood. That neighborhood required a 14.4% increase. That 14.4 ultimately ended up in being a level of assessment at 87.69. I would have liked to have been a little higher, but 87.69 is where we ended up. So again, we start out big, we drill down, then we start building it back up. So you can go through every one of these, and as you see the median change of that neighborhood, that is that average change. If you go down to Augustana Hillside, that neighborhood required a 29.5% increase. And we're at an 84. I'm not even making it to 85 in that one quite yet. The sum of all of those end of level of assessments, all of those, the median of that is where we get the county-wide, and that's where we're at 90%. So we do have one neighborhood that I am over on, just so everyone knows. It is Humboldt Township, and the reason for that is I had one sale. I cannot raise or lower anybody's values on one sale. I need a minimum of 5 sales before I can make a change. And that one sale, I happen to be ending at 105. And you can see that Humboldt Township increased 3.4%. That wasn't anything of my market change. That is those cost tables that went on.
Mm-hmm. Questions for Chris?
Madam Chair?
Commissioner
I have
Barth.
two things, actually. Chris, what would be the effect on my value if a CO2 pipeline was put diagonally across my 100 acres?
Hard to say.
Okay.
It really is. I've experienced this when I was in Brookings County, the wind towers. Everyone said they're putting wind towers, they're putting wind towers. My value is shot, this and that. The reality was those acreages sold the same,
Okay.
and they kept increasing. We never saw an impact of that. I saw it on the rail line when they brought the high-speed trains right through the middle of Brookings, and everyone on Orchard Drive said, my values are shot, my values are shot. They wanted me to lower them, I can't. We follow the market. If they sell lower, then we'll adjust them, and we can pinpoint and say why. It never happened.
The other thing I would like to mention is that one of your predecessors passed away this past week, Kyle Helseth. And I just wanted to mention his name. He was a valued county employee and a good guy.
Additional questions? Commissioner Kursky?
Thank you, Chris. A lot of neighborhoods, 120 plus, is that right?
20% increase? Yeah.
No, how many neighborhoods do you
Oh,
value?
yes, neighborhoods, I think there was 174
Okay.
countywide.
Does my little card or my thing tell me what neighborhood I'm in?
No, it does not. This is only our groupings for our office. It's our neighborhood names. Most of them are going to fall like I know you're in Cherry Lake. Your neighborhood is called Cherry Lake. I mean, most of them are going to be pretty much on the money. We tried to name them, but a lot of neighborhoods might have 3 or 4 or 5 additions within that neighborhood, and typically that neighborhood is going to be the primary addition name within there. So
Kings would be a good example. You know,
Yeah.
numerous. So, okay. So when you get your assessment notice and your increase is 18.3% or less, you're just with what everybody else is doing.
Correct. You know, if we didn't have this crazy market, I mean, even if you look at a neighborhood that Augustana Northwest that we're seeing, we needed a 26.7% increase. If you take the 18% away on a normal year, that's an 8%.
And I'd also remind the public again, that just because there's an 18% or a 20% increase in your valuation, that does not mean there's an 18 or 20% valuation or increase in your taxes.
Right.
They are
Very good point.
different.
Very good point. You
Different.
know, with the average increase at 18.3%, if your property went up 18.3% or less, your property taxes are probably going to go down. Probably, I say that.
So I have one more question. So if the market would drop out in like, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 years, and it drops by 25%, does equalization go back in and lower valuations across the board by 25%?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
We follow it up, we follow it down.
Right, so people need to know that too, that it follows the market, and this is just how much your house is worth.
Based on-
not how much your tax.
Based on your neighbors buying and selling homes.
Right. Okay. Any more questions for Commissioner Barth?
Go ahead, Gerald.
Commissioner Benega?
As I listened to you, you took 20, 30 minutes to try to explain what's going on to, frankly, people who understand parts of this. And when you go through all your gyrations to come up with property tax values and ultimately what taxes are going to be eventually, how does the county communicate that information to a taxpayer and to a homeowner without making multiple phone calls, multiple addresses to the county commission, showing up at equalization hearings, those kinds of things? Because I think people need to understand at least some of the basics, which I would bet 97% of them don't. So the problem is we need to find a way to communicate what you just told us in 30 minutes, which isn't a criticism, but we need to give them the opportunity to understand how this works and frankly, how it affects not only valuations, but more importantly, how it could affect their taxes. Because we don't do that, we're gonna have a 18% grumpy rate.
Right. Yeah, and we do have a video on, if anybody wants to go into the Minnehaha County website.
I don't think
under
one
equalization.
video is gonna be enough of an
Right.
information
Right.
package
You
to
know,
make it
I'm
happen.
open to suggestions, but we do have a video that kind of explains our process in a kind of a comedic way all the way through. But I've often said homeownership, they should have a civics course for that. If you buy a home, you should have to do a 2-hour class before you can accept that deed
A
and be
civics
told.
class is not going to be something that anybody's gonna pursue while we're in the middle of this
Right.
process.
If I could, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Barth?
Yesterday morning, Chris and I and Carol Muller spent 45 minutes on a Zoom meeting discussing exactly what you talked about. How can we communicate to the taxpayers, to the property owners that, yes, your valuation has gone up, but no, your taxes do not correlate to that valuation increase. There's a huge difference. And Chris mentioned, you know, when you get your notice and you see your valuation, ask yourself, is my property worth that? And if it is, it should be equalized, your job, to all your neighbors. But yes, we spent a lot of time yesterday. There's talking points that are going out so that department heads and his staff and we're all have the same communication and we're all talking the same message. But yeah, that was my concern when Chris called me last week and told me, you know, 18+% and, you know, the numbers, sheer volume of properties. So we do want to make sure that we are communicating that message to the taxpayers that good news is your property value went up. Good news is taxes don't correlate on a one-for-one basis. So
Maybe a note, because now our property evaluations come in an envelope. They used to come as a card. Maybe a note in very bold print, read this, and then very bold print, the ABCs, maybe 3 bullet
Right.
points. Because if you get, like me, sometimes I'm like, I don't want to read this. But if it says read this in bold letters, maybe 50% of the people will read that note, and maybe there's an exclamation in with their property tax notice before they have a heart attack and call you.
Now, I can't remember if we had to order new envelopes, and I bet we forgot. Last year, we had stamped in red on the envelope, important assessment notice, and I bet we didn't get that on this year's. Overthought
Still
that.
put a letter inside.
Yep.
I just
Yep,
throwing one more idea
I
out.
can't do it now. It's already out of our hands. It's sitting there, but I appreciate that, and we'll put it in for next year as well.
Big, bold letters. So, Commissioner Barth?
One thing I think people need to understand is your job in equalization is just to determine the values, and the taxes then come over to those and are equalized between all these different properties. And if if valuations went down to $1, we would still collect the millions in taxes that we need to operate this county. And so, you know, if your valuation went up or it went down, your job is just to determine, relatively speaking, how much each group pays. And, you know, a bank pays more than a residence. But again, if it all went down to $1, we would still collect the millions of dollars in taxes that we are authorized to collect.
One final point.
Yep, no point.
The county collects, and we're talking equalization here, which is just values, but when we talk about taxes, the county is not the sole taxing entity. You got the school districts, you have the townships, you have the municipalities, and the county gets probably one of the smallest slices of that pie when it comes right down to it.
The water board.
And any opt-out by your school district or your locality. So,
Yep.
lots of things on that bill.
We collect the heat, but we don't get
Right.
collect the taxes, yeah.
All right, thanks, Chris, for your time and your explanation.
Thank
We
you.
will move forward and hope people understand.
Thank you.
Item number 2 is a briefing to review the quotes for the demolition of the 1900 West Russell Street. Tyler.
Good morning, Tyler Klatt, Commission Office. At the February Building Committee meeting, it was directed for us to obtain some quotes on how much it would cost to tear down the existing structure at 1900 West Russell Street. Facilities Director Mark Krenz collected 2 different quotes, one from Friesen Construction, one from Sukup Construction. The details are there as far as base prices. You can see Sukup's base total was $62,000. Friesen's Construction was a base of $194,400. Both quotes provided some additional services that they would be able to offer for a fee as well. So at this point, we would like some direction as far as pursuing demolition of the building versus not as we move forward with the auction process. And Mark is here as well to probably answer questions a little bit better than I can about this process.
Questions for Tyler? I have one. Commissioner
There's no reason not to take the low bid, is there?
I would leave that to your discretion, but I don't.
I mean, I think part of what we're talking about is not just taking the low bid, it's should we do this at all? Should we allow the buyer to buy the property as is and do their own demolition and decide whether they do or don't want the asphalt removed or do or don't want the building removed, or whether we should go ahead and do it and take that issue off the table and thinking that we'll get the highest potential value.
So basically, do we want to put $62,000 in it, or do we just, now the bids are there, people have an idea what they would be potentially putting into that property over and above their sale price or included? Commissioner Karski?
Tongue in cheek, isn't the highway department getting some new front-end loaders they could tear it down? No, I mean, and I don't sell commercial property, obviously, you know, how are we being advised? I mean, by our experts that we're hiring, I mean, do they think it's better for us to sell a vacant lot or sell it as is and let them do it? I don't know. It's not my thing, so I'm looking for advice.
My recollection, Mark, maybe you're able to fill me in here too, is their advice was a flat parcel is probably going to be more appealing than the existing structure. You also run the risk of someone thinking, well, not risk necessarily, but the chance that someone thinks they can take the building as is and fix it up on the inside, and it still continues to exist as it looks today, which isn't right or wrong, but it is a possibility. So their advice initially was it may be worth the time to demolish it because then you get a clean slate for someone to pursue in an auction situation.
What's the time frame if we decided to demolish? How quickly can we get it down? Because we'd like to get this property sold.
I don't know the answer to that. I thought I saw Mark, but do not know.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
you know, to Commissioner Bender's brilliant point, sometimes when you buy or sell a property, you know, the seller will give you $10,000 for a new carpet or something. So we could maybe keep that in mind and offer a potential buyer an amount for demolish or repair and save this expense at this time, but move the sale forward.
Don't you think that would be a part of their consideration if the building's up and we tell them it takes $62,000 to take it down? I would think it'd be part of their bid consideration.
That was part of the discussion with Sutton Auctioneers as well. That number gets baked in one way or another.
Commissioner Benega, he's going to say something.
I think that one of the issues when you look at the quotes is there's reasons why there are alternatives to the basic quote. So depending on who the buyer is, they may or may not take all of those additional amendments, if you will, to the base. So I personally think it depends on who the buyer is, and we will not know that till after it's sold. So I think we leave the building as is and let the contractor and the buyer work out what they want in the package.
I would tend to agree with that.
I would too. I think we've done our due diligence as far as here's what's available and this is what it's going to cost you, and they can take that into consideration when they're putting in their bids on this property. And plus, we don't know what the time frame would be.
Makes sense to me.
If I could add one thing. Initially, when this process began, our minimum bid was going to be $1 million, and that was based on the appraisal report we had received. I guess I would ask you how you want to proceed with that number, if kind of seeing where these totals sit, how you want to play with that number as we move forward in auctioning.
Commissioner Bender.
I would be interested in deferring this and being able to talk about it in the building committee next week, now that we have this information, that we can kind of have an opportunity to visit about it, maybe reach out and find out timing of when this demolition would occur possibly. But I think it makes sense for us to defer this until next week, our next commission meeting, for a final decision on bids and those type of things.
I think
Commissioner
two of us
Christie.
will be gone for next week.
Okay.
And then the following week, we don't have a meeting, and then, so now we've kicked it down until
Middle of March.
March 15th. And
Do we need all three commissioners here? I mean, do we need 5 commissioners here to make a final decision? I mean, the commissioners that are absent next week would then have a week to
Yeah.
provide their input as to what they
Yeah.
think.
And I think we could. Then, could we still put it on the agenda for next week after the building, and we could also defer it? If we put it on the building committee, make decisions in building committee, put it on the agenda next week to finalize those decisions, because we could also defer it if we don't make a decision in the building committee.
And then the resolution would be March 15th, is that what you're saying, Carol?
No, I was saying it would be next week.
Because the building committee would basically kind of hash this out,
Correct,
and then it would have to come back to a full commission.
correct. But we could still do it in the same week.
And that's what my question is.
I need to rethink just a little bit. We did set the price by resolution, didn't we? I believe so. We will double check on that. When that case, then we would just need to update that resolution, and we can provide a draft update resolution for next week that you can either change a number in, or you can take it off the agenda, or you can delay whatever you want to do with it. I think that probably works the best.
Madam Chair?
Commissioner Kursky.
My recollection is that we were advised by the auction company to lower the minimum to, I think, $750,000. Is that the right number, Tyler?
That's correct, and that was based on kind of especially the higher quote, assuming how much that would cost.
And I personally would be favoring in that type of action, because I think if we set the minimum too high, we could lose a bidder or two, because they look at it and say, well, if the bid's $1 million and we think it's only worth $840, why would they come and even work on the bid? So my suggestion or preference would be to lower that minimum. I asked what did the experts suggest we do, and if I hire an attorney or I hire a doctor or whatever professional, I tend to listen to their advice.
Sure.
Well, we can have this discussion next week in Building Committee, and I appreciate you giving us your thoughts ahead of time. And then we will move forward with the resolution. Are we also deciding next week when to set the date for our auction? Because we do have an auctioneer ready to go as soon as we set a date. Because if that's the case, then Tyler needs to talk to him and find out what dates are available.
I think that that's what we need to do.
Okay.
And I think if Tyler can reach out to him and give him the opportunity to come to the building committee, that'd be helpful as well.
That would be very helpful. Good point.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
We think you have all your direction there, Tyler?
Think so.
Okay. All right. With that, we're going to move on to item number 23, which is a briefing to discuss the 2022 legislative updates.
Tyler Klatt, Commission Office again. This update is through day 24. I want to highlight just a few bills that have been causing us some concern or paying attention to at least. House Bill 1222 would allow for a reduced property tax for anyone operating a family daycare. Those are operations that have 12 children or less who are not related to the person operating it. This would allow for up to a maximum of a 20% reduction in the total property tax for that, or total assessed value, rather. Right now, that is on the House floor, I believe. Senate Bill 212, which was related to the concealed carry and pistol permits, has been amended pretty significantly, and my understanding is that now the county is going to continue to retain the same amount of revenue they had previously. The state has just removed their percentages that they had been getting. Senate Bill 198. This legislation removes a significant part of the state's juvenile justice system. The Senate is hearing this one today. It might be delayed till tomorrow, according to the Argus Leader's story from a few days ago. But it does make some significant changes to the progress that's been made in the juvenile justice system. And for your information, worked with the Commissioner Heiberger, and we did send a letter to the Senate in opposition to this bill. Finally, Senate Bill 91, wanted to point out that our county, that our highway superintendent, Steve Groen, was instrumental in getting this bill to the governor's desk. It allows highway vehicles to operate with blue lights, which I believe is essentially a big safety concern, or allows for improved safety. But he was a big part of getting that to the governor's desk, so I want to thank him for doing that. If there's any questions on any other bills, I'd be happy to try to answer those, but those were the few that I thought were worth pointing out at this point.
I'm just going to make an additional comment on 198. If that actually happens, we would lose a tremendous amount of federal funding that goes towards juveniles, and we would also lose some state funding, a diversion money that we use for young adults who are low-level offenders to put them in different programming would go away. It's a huge financial hit to counties, but the bigger deal is it's a huge hit to juveniles. Are there some issues? Yes. What we would like to see is a summer study. That is part of the bill, but there's a whole lot more included in that bill that is negatively impacting our juveniles in the state of South Dakota and our county budgets.
Yeah, well said.
Any other comments?
I would just like to support what you just said. I was on a lengthy phone call on Friday afternoon with a large group that talked about this in particular, and it was brought up in multiple conversations. About 2 out of the 3 governors who have been involved in this have endorsed what Senate Bill 78 was originally. And frankly, if this bill passes without any further details about the data that's been presented, we'll probably move juvenile justice back 25 years. And that was a comment that came from one of the experts in the field, to say the least.
And I'm far from an expert, but I've done this for 11 years, and I can tell you that it will move us back tremendously. And although there are concerns, what they want to do will destroy all the positive that has been happening. So I would urge you, if you have time, to call your friends and ask them to not support this bill. All right, if there's no other questions about legislations, I would move on to Commissioners' Liaison reports. Commissioner Karski.
Last week, we had the Sioux Metro Growth Alliance annual meeting, and I would have to tell you that there is some great energy with that group. They've brought in lapsed members, the communities that kind of fell away from it when it was Makita and Lakita. They've added new ones, like Salem, for example. One of their city council members, I believe, got up and talked and just mentioned, they have not had economic development, period. And they're just excited to be part of this group. So there's a lot of positive energy behind Sioux Metro Growth Alliance. So, Jesse Fonkert and the staff there, congratulate them and just keep things moving. It's good positive momentum. So recognized several communities and individuals for their contributions, and it was a very good meeting.
Additional reports? I have a couple of comments. One is the housing application grant that we put into the MacArthur Foundation, which has just been kind of flying along since December. We were accepted in the next stage of the grant, and we will now be having an interview this week. So we'll be having a prep meeting on Wednesday for that call, and then interview with the selection committee to decide whether we actually get the grant. So we'll probably know in the next couple of weeks where that is, and that that's a housing grant to deal with people coming out of the criminal justice system who are struggling with housing, and particularly minorities that deal with those types of issues. Then I was at National Association of Counties legislative session this last week, and that's why I was absent from County Commission. And a couple of different things that came out of there was I attended mostly the ARPA funding breakout sessions, and I would say probably the main point that came out of those meetings to me is that it was repeatedly said that there will be more ARPA money in 2022 and 2023 being announced. They will be grants made available. They didn't know specifically what those grants would be for at this point, but they did question 3 different topics. One would be cybersecurity grants, transportation grants, and housing grants. It was also noted that HUD funds, which come from the government, could be used as matching funds in those housing grants from ARPA. And it also mentioned that strong possibility that ARPA funds that we currently have could be used to match some of those grants that are going to be coming available. So more news in the future on grants and ARPA funds. And then I also attended the Waters of the U.S. because after the hard work that we did the last couple of years to try to change some of the what is recognized by Waters of the U.S. as navigable, I'm sorry, I can't say that right, waters, such as ditch water from rainfall, has now been put back into effect. And so the comment period is closed on that, but there still continues to be conversations. It would be, in a lot of ways, detrimental to a lot of agricultural communities. And then one more, I sit on the NACO Justice and Safety Group, and we had 3 resolutions this year that came forward in our legislative one, and one was supporting the 988 implementation, which is the emergency number for mental health. That did pass our committee. We also, there was a resolution supporting county human services and mental health services in conjunction with FEMA. Some of these communities that have been hard hit felt like their human services and their health services were getting pushed aside, and there was lack of coordination. We worked significantly behind the scenes on that to get that wording correct on that, and all sides were satisfied with where we came up with a resolution on that. And the last one was a resolution to support qualified immunity, which has to do with law enforcement. And there is a movement out there to take away qualified immunity. In the end, and an awful lot of discussion, our committee did pass that on to the next level, and we'll see where that goes. We would hate to see qualified immunity for our law enforcement to disappear, and we sure don't want our National Association of Counties to be supporting that type of legislation. At least I personally don't want that. So those are my reports. Commissioner Barth.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask Cindy, did you get any info from the Department of Transportation, Secretary Buttigieg, about possible help with our infrastructure stuff that's might be coming in with additional funding?
I was not at his meeting. He was delayed, and so I was not when he presented. It is recorded and it is online, so you could follow up with that. And I would say our President Biden also spoke. He had a good message for about 25 minutes if you were specifically talking about counties. So if you're so interested in listening to it, you can also go on the NACO website and catch his speech, because that is how I caught his too.
Second question then, talking about mental illness, I think that's a huge issue with our JDC and stuff.
Yes.
Are we going to get additional help with that? It seems like the state of South Dakota has really dropped the ball as far as mental health is concerned, in my opinion. And we could do a lot better if they would fully fund mental health.
I agree. Commissioner Bender.
I just wanted to point out, as Chris Lola said, the extension group has moved over across the street, and that has vacated their space up on 3rd floor. And so we are all going to have the delight of possibly hearing the lovely sound of destruction. And on this building, as they started this week up on 3rd floor, Carol Muller was able to kind of lead a group in through the disruption avoidance planning last week. And so I think that we have a really good plan that Henry Carlson really helped a lot, and Tegra worked with to put together to keep the departments here functioning as well as possible, and to do very discrete projects that they'll be able to kind of cordon off. But there's always a little bit of inconvenience when you start doing things like that. Bathrooms will be closed down on certain floors for periods of time, and we just really appreciate all the staff here in this building and the public as we work through that process. I think it will be a great end result once we get through it.
This has been a very long process, and we are moving some departments around to create more space for some of them. And one of the departments that's moving will be the commission office, not because we need more space, but because our space is needed by other departments. And so it will be a process this summer. So thank you, Commissioner Bender, for remembering to bring that up. Is there any non-action commission discussion? Commissioner Barth.
I just would like to say that I think we should take and write a letter on the CO2 pipeline. I am currently getting more and more concerned about eminent domain and the damage, if not vandalism, that's done to our land as these things crisscross all over. And, you know, we send oil by tanker truck to the south. Why can't it take the CO2 coming back? I don't know. But I'm not enamored of their plan. And whatever they do, you know, permanently damages this land. And perhaps they need to set aside enough money to take out their pipe if they should ever quit doing it.
Thank you. Commissioner, excuse me, any other non-action commission discussion? All right, with that, I would look for a motion to recess.
So
the
moved.
meeting.
Second?
I have a motion and a second. We'll recess for about 10 minutes. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously.